some news we have been waiting for a while coming out of OpenAI, and this is around Search GPT. At some point, they are going to change up the name of this. You know, the naming conventions of OpenAI has not been great so far, but at least we understand Search GPT, and you all do too. Search GPT is based on this notion that OpenAI is finally going to be creating a search engine. There have been rumors about this for months now. Jaden, I know you were looking into this a little bit. Excited about it? Not excited about it? What do you know about it?
Yeah, so overall, I think this is a really interesting play. A lot of people are like, oh my gosh, this is like the final, stroke of death for Google. OpenAI is coming in. It's like, because the thing is, it's not like it's doing anything too revolutionary from other AI startups that we've seen. So I think the big elephant in the room is that it's kind of like they're competing more directly with Perplexity. I think Perplexity is going to have a harder time than maybe Google from this. But at the same time, it's like, I don't know. I don't really see this competing too heavily with Google because it's not doing that many new things. So breaking down exactly what it does, essentially, it does Search GPT. It's like it's a standard Google search. It's giving you the results where it's kind of doing summaries of web pages or a full summary of the actual thing, kind of like you'd expect from ChatGPT. It also does more where it's actually like grabbing images from the web. Everything that it says, it's going to be citing the sources. They kind of say this like it's a new thing, but like, to be honest, when I have like ChatGPT or GPT-4o or whatever, it's still searching the web for half my questions, right, and it's still doing that, like citing the sources. So like, I don't really know how much more it's going to change other than the fact that they've officially labeled it Search GPT. Officially, they're competing with Google. But otherwise, I don't know. It doesn't seem like too new or different. There's no crazy new features that I'm seeing here.
Yeah, but don't you think the user interface is everything in these cases? I mean, I know that I use ChatGPT. I'm always sort of surprised when ChatGPT not opens up a browser, but it says searching the internet or whatever it does these days. I can't remember if it says that. Only because I'm not usually using ChatGPT for, current stuff like the way I would use Perplexity. And I love the interface on Perplexity. Now, Perplexity has some challenges of its own, of course. But with the, ChatGPT, I know it's searching the internet, but, it sort of just gives you an answer. It sort of gives you a little one source button at the end. But the Perplexity interface feels like what ChatGPT is moving toward. No? Or what does that look like to you?
Yeah, I mean, maybe there might be some small interface changes. It's true. I think at the end of the day, though, it's like Perplexity's kind of already nailed this and is doing this really well. So an interesting thing when OpenAI came out with this, they said this is they didn't even say like beta. The wording that they used was, this is a temporary experiment.
Right.
Which is interesting because I think they feel maybe like they got a little bit burnt when they did the plugins, the ChatGPT plugins, and Sam Altman said they never really reached product market fit. You don't really hear people talk about them. I talked to people on my podcast that had developed plugins, and they said the support was horrible. They had plugins waiting for like forever in review, and they never got back, and there was no documentation, and it was just like, it just seems like it wasn't very developed. Didn't feel like a lot of people were using it. So it feels like they kind of dropped it. They just shifted over to like more like GPTs. And I'd be curious to see what their numbers are on GPTs, how well those are doing. But yeah, it feels like they're kind of wary of launching a product that maybe they stop supporting in the very near future. They don't want to call it a failure. So instead, they're just like, this is a temporary experiment. And they said, we're going to take everything we learned from this, like select people are going to be able to get like the beta access. We're going to take everything we learned from this, and we're going to incorporate it into ChatGPT. So it seems like they're going to be sticking more to the core of like ChatGPT being kind of like the core tool, and they'll just implement the features and it's using it as like an experiment. So I don't even know if this is something that's going to become like a standalone tool. Now, let's say it was madly popular and everyone loved it and it got rave reviews. Yeah, they probably would go make it a standalone tool. But I think they're really like trying to distance themselves. I think there's a couple of reasons, but one probably is the fact they're worried it won't get the big adoption that they hope.
Yeah, with that, well, that's actually the big question that I had in terms of adoption, because in a way, everything is search. When you're going on ChatGPT or anything like that, you're searching for something. Some of it is just, hey, I need help brainstorming this or something like that. And you're right, I don't think it's a competitor to Google. I do think it's a competitor to Perplexity, although Perplexity I mean, just in terms of valuation alone is doing great, but Perplexity, as we've seen, has had major problems. Now, I don't know if major problems in this world today equates to, oh, they're going to get taken down. I think major problems with, Rabbit or something like that, an R1 device where it actually doesn't work, that's one thing. But when they say, oh, they're kind of breaking the law or whatever, I mean, OpenAI is in the middle of a lawsuit with the New York Times, and Perplexity, there's just been a ton coming out of how, they're scraping sites they're not supposed to scrape, and they're plagiarizing and everything else. I just feel like these companies are getting too big to fail. So I'm really curious to sort of see whether or not this takes over Perplexity. I'll tell you this, that I know a lot of people use Perplexity, but a lot of people don't use Perplexity as well. And way more people are using ChatGPT than Perplexity. And so if ChatGPT says, hey, we have this thing, and the product is going to be as good as Perplexity, I don't really have any doubt about that. The only good thing about Perplexity to me is I actually don't use ChatGPT as kind of the underlying engine. I use Claude because I like the output better, but that's a marginal difference. About Google, you're right. All these headlines, Jaden, are all like, oh, this is going to take on Google. I think Google's biggest competitor is Google. I mean, and that's because they're about to lose not all their ad revenue, but a huge amount of their ad revenue because they have to keep up in terms of these these generated search results that don't allow plugging in for ads. So to me, I don't think Google's in trouble. I just think that they have to change their business model radically, and I'm sure this will push it. But what's the impact on that? Because OpenAI and Google are head to head at this point, right?
Yeah, 100%. I think you're right. I think that's probably the biggest competitor. I don't think this is a story of like OpenAI versus Google, to be honest. Until the point where even ChatGPT has enough users to seem like it's like a real major player there. Which 1 billion people using Google, and 100 million using ChatGPT, but no one's completely exclusively using one or the other. So I don't really see these two eating into each other too much. That being said, though, I mean, it's got to have some sort of impact. A lot of people are using ChatGPT instead of Google, so I mean, there is that. So one other thing that I have seen, though, that I do think is a really interesting point is the comments coming out of X from developers with this new launch.
Sure.
A lot of people, not like everyone's in like some sort of search business, but a lot of people do not like it. They hate it. Developers absolutely hate it when OpenAI or any of these other players make a tool that's not just focusing on the underlying technology. It's not just making the LLM better, whether that's text, image, video, audio. There's a lot of places to go with this, and OpenAI isn't touching half of them. Instead of making that better, it's like they're working on a consumer product. And they're working on a consumer product that's already successfully been done. So it's like they're pretty much taking the most successful user use case, which is Perplexity and U.com of ChatGPT, that people are like commercially using, and then they're building like their own version. And developers hate this because they're like, well, if they're building like, a search GPT, what's to stop them from building travel GPT?
Right,
And
right.
kind of like going like Google, when Google did Google Flights. I remember my dad, he did online travel back when that came out, and he was like so mad, and he's like, oh, they're going to compete with us. And to be fair, Google Flights like wiped out most travel agents. I myself always use Google Flights because it shows you the price history and stuff. So I think developers are very wary of that. They don't like it. And I think the good news is, unlike Google, back in like no one's going to stop using Google. The good news is there's a lot of competition. So you have Claude, you have Gemini, you have all these other players. And if OpenAI really did come out with Search GPT and they went really hard and they rubbed a bunch of people the wrong way, like, oh, OpenAI keeps coming out with these consumer products that essentially is just like the most successful people using them. I think those players, they have a very easy alternative to just switch it off of OpenAI, switch it to Claude, switch it to Gemini, or someone else they feel like is less of a threat and less of a threat to their business, right? So, I mean, I don't know. I'll be curious to see, and maybe this is another reason why they were so cautious using the language like, oh, this is a temporary kind of experiment. They don't want developers to be freaked out that they're like starting to create consumer products. I mean, ChatGPT is a consumer product, but like,
right.
it's like that is its own product. So, anyways, This is also very interesting other area that I haven't seen a lot of people talk about.
Yeah, it's interesting. I don't know much about how big you have to become a search engine. I mean, it must just be colossally difficult, and I think that's proven out by the fact that, and I don't want to misquote, so I'll be very careful about how I talk about this. But Perplexity, it's not like Perplexity was just creating its own model, right? I mean, there's a lot of talk about like, oh, they were just borrowing this algorithm from here. And what Google did, I don't think can be, understated or overstated rather at all. It's incredible what Google has created and everything like that. So as I'm looking toward the future of search, we've talked a lot about the future of SEO and advertisement and revenue and all that kind of stuff. But just to sort of, I just want to take 30 seconds on this, Jaden, get your thought on this. I'm thinking now that with Perplexity, especially with ChatGPT, and especially with ChatGPT learning who you are more and more with memorization, or, it memorizes you and it understands you and it has a memory for your past chats and everything. I'm wondering now if it's going to tailor search based on who you are. So if I'm like some total right-wing conservative living in some area, and clearly I'm talking about that kind of stuff all the time, will Search GPT remember all that about me? Because that's where we're going, right? Hyper-personalization. And will it start to tailor search results? So if I'm looking at, the presidential candidates or something like that, will it only start pulling from whatever? Because when I do demos around Perplexity, I always say like, hey, look, note where this is coming from. Is it coming from NPR? Is it coming from Fox News? That to me is the big question about where Search GPT is going to come, especially if you have search become more personal. That's interesting to me.
That is an interesting concept, but also you could say that the same thing could be done by Google, but hasn't, right? Like Google, and like to some degree it has. Google search results are slightly impacted by sites you've seen in the past. So like if you visited a site before, it's more likely that it's going to show up at the top. But like as far as reading into it, you're right. Maybe OpenAI has like a better capability of doing this because they understand the context of how things are going. I think Google actually understands all that same context and they have for, 5, 6, 7.
But do they use it? Yeah, that's actually, it's a good point. But do they use it? Like they must have all the information, but I mean, are they using it? I can't tell in the search algorithm. I mean, maybe I'm just, because it's kind of just going over my head. I don't know.
I would say no, because, my political views are not always reflected in Google search results when I'm searching for things. So I would
Right.
guess no.
Right.
I mean, there's political views, but like preferences on companies and whatever. Like, I
Right.
don't feel like they're too, they don't alter the algorithm, which is interesting because social media platforms obviously do alter the algorithm, whether that's Facebook or X or whatever. So, I mean, that's kind of like the name of the game there is they feed you up content that you're interested in. That would be interesting. I mean, is it a feature or a bug? Do people like it or do they dislike it more? Like, do they be like, would they be like, hey, like, I don't want to feel like I'm in an echo chamber? Because sometimes I do feel like that on certain social media sites, Reddit seems much more left wing. X seems much more right wing. I mean, depending on what.
We love our echo. What are you talking about? We love echo chambers. We love it. We feel like finally everybody gets me. This site gets it. That's why I think maybe that's the play. Now I'm all in on this conspiracy thing, where it's all in. Search GPT is just going to be an echo chamber search. And I think that that's where it's going to go. It has to be. It can't just be, hey, more of the same. I think ChatGPT and OpenAI have to come up with something better. And I think Search GPT is going to be that, planting my flag in the ground right here. It's going to be
they do have the capability because, as you know, when they integrated like the knowledge thing or whatever, when you say stuff, it's like, hey, we're like making a note of this thing you've said, and it's like storing in like a profile, and you can go look at all the bits of information they collect about you. I honestly like that way more than just like Google, which is like a black box. Like, I don't know what it knows about me. Like I would love to go and edit that if I could. But so I do think, there's precedent, and maybe people like that. Maybe people like the echo chamber. If that's the case, there you go. I like my echo chamber too, now that you mention it, Connor. Maybe it's not such a bad.
All right. Well, we hope that your echo chamber is right here on AI. We hope that we are talking exactly about the kind of stuff that you guys want to be hearing about. Thank you so much for joining us. We hope that you are having an incredible summer, and I hope you have an incredible rest of the day.